London and have been heavily involved in developing national red lists for some time. And today we obviously have a meeting here to go through national red lists and look at various people's experience and think about how we can really develop a much stronger community, and also think about how we can actually get these national red lists funded. And we have a very strong lineup here. We have John Paul Rodriguez, who's the deputy head of the IUCN Species Survival Commission. And he's been taking forward a very similar initiative, although he's been leading on national red lists at the species level for some time. He's also been focusing on developing ecosystem-based red lists. And we wanted to potentially discuss the possibility of bringing both these initiatives forward at the same time. And in his talk, he'll be focusing on the relationship too between the global red list assessment and the national red list assessment. And the second speaker we have is Rebecca Miller, who's also been a diehard national red lister for years and has really been focusing on training and capacity building. And Rebecca is now based in the UK and is developing training programs. And we're going to hear more about how we can build up capacity to do national level red lists. And then we have Florian Kitchener, who is from the IUCN France, and he's dedicated a lot of time in developing the red list for France, and is going to share that experience and the process they went through, from everything from funding to getting people together to develop the red list to actually delivering it on the ground. Now, we want this to be as informal as possible. We want to keep the talks fairly short, and then we would like to hear from all of you. So please be thinking about your questions or how you think we can develop, strengthen the National Red List network, and how we can actually generate some more funding. And this funding issue really concerns me, and I'll get back to it in the quick presentation I'll give, but we have all the governments demanding us to report on natural capital and to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals, to uphold the 2020 targets of the CBD, but at the same time they're putting no funding or very little funding into the development of national red lists. And we keep pushing and pushing, but we just can't get them to develop this pot of money that can help people develop the capacity and the resources to deliver on red lists. So that's something we really want to come back to. Again, we want this to be as formal as possible, and also I'm not going to be able to chair the entire event. I have to run to another one, and so Rebecca Miller will be taking over from me. But we would like to have a workshop in London later this year to really get down into detail about how we can ramp up the funding for national red lists. So please leave your name with Rebecca if you're interested in taking part in that. So just an update, very exciting news. We've totally updated the National Red List website. It was sitting there a bit idle for a while, and it looked a bit 80s as well. So we've revamped it, and we're trying to make it a lot more dynamic so that we can use it as more of a way for the whole community to network. We have just under 70,000 species accounts, which is pretty phenomenal. We have 64 countries with data online. We're aware that there's 123 countries that have national red lists, so there's still a number we have to get in there, and everyone's help in that is greatly appreciated. And of those that are out there, we know that about 78 use the IUCN system. So this is the look of the new website. This is the home page here, so obviously you can just go in and search right from the front of the database. It's quite clean and hopefully quite straightforward. And you can go down and see where the red lists are. But it just doesn't house the red list, it also houses action plans. So there's more species-based action plans, habitat-based action plans. We're getting more national biodiversity action plans and strategies. These kind of just sit all over the place, and we can't learn from each other and how we're doing them and how we're developing templates. So we really want this to be a site where we can also collect that type of information. And so this just gives you some insight. When you go through to the publications page, you can look at the various red lists from different countries. You can click on it and get that actual red list, a PDF of it, where possible, or you could look at action plans. We also have a news page, so if a workshop's being held in a specific country, you can provide that information. You can put down learnings from various red list assessments, and hopefully the community will use this as much as possible. Obviously, there's the search function. So here you typed in dolphin, the various dolphins come up. It'll say the conservation status. If you click on one, it'll take you through to the species account. This isn't a dolphin, but it will provide all the basic information on the species. Plus, it tells you if it's a red list assessment or if it's just a generic assessment that has been done using another system. So we encourage everyone, whether you're using the IUCN categories and criteria or not, put this information here, and we just define who's put the information up and what type of classification system has been used. It'll also give the global status, and it'll give the regional status. So I always think of the guidelines as a relatively new thing, but they've actually been around for quite some time now. This process really started, I'd say in 2006, it really got moving forward when John Paul Rodriguez came on board and started getting quite upset that there wasn't much attention from IUCN for national red lists, and that really started to get the momentum going. The categories and criteria were first produced by Alf Gardenfors. There's many reasons you might want to do a national red list. You might want to know about individual species in the country, so you might want to do a species-specific action plan. You might want to know general patterns of the status of species in your country. So you might want to know the difference between a bunch of different invertebrate groups, or you might want to know the overall status. You might want to know where things are threatened, say within a country or globally. So you can use the information to divide it up by region. You can also look at it more spatially, obviously. So you're looking at it on a map, so you can see areas where you have particularly dense areas of threatened species, or areas where there's high numbers of data deficient species. Or you can just explore species richness as a whole. You can get insight into threat processes. So here it's telling us for invertebrates, and this is marine invertebrates, that pollution is the greatest driver of loss in the marine system for invertebrates, followed by dams, followed by infrastructure development. But obviously you can generate this type of information for any species group you have in the database. And more the red list is being used to track trends through time, so trends in extinction risk. And here you can use the assessments carried out at regular intervals to start developing data points through time. And you can see the number of species that are becoming more threatened and the number of species that are becoming less threatened. And guidelines have been produced. They're available online to help with this process. You might want it as a conservation tool. So once you have all the assessments and you have the maps, you can take a country like Mongolia where this has been done. You click on the map and it brings up all the species that are found that have been assessed at that location. And then it tells you all the threatened species in that area. So if you're a mining company, for example, and you wanted to know based on the national red list where species were found and where you should be concerned about them, you could use this system here, and it can be used as part of an environmental impact assessment process. You might want to map, say, all threatened species within a country, and then overlay the protected areas so you can see the extent to which you have protected areas covering zones where you have threatened species. And we've been talking more and more about natural capital, but what is natural capital, and how do you determine the status of your natural capital? So if you're interested at the species level, what's happening to your natural capital, then developing red lists and action plans associated with them is extremely important part of the process. And obviously you need the red list data to develop these various action plans and national level action plans. Now the good news is that this has already been supported by the CBD in Nagoya. We set the 2020 targets, and we obviously want to make sure that we're reversing the decline of the most threatened species, and to do that you obviously need to know where those species are, how threatened they are, and if you've actually done anything to improve their status or not. So you need some sort of national level red listing system to achieve that. So one would think that there would then be funding to actually do your red list. It's also been adopted as part of the indicator process under the Sustainable Development Goals, or the Millennium Development Goals rather, which are now being moved into the Sustainable Development Goals. And these, of course, coming out of Rio are being re-looked at, but obviously tracking trends in threatened species will be part of that process. So the big challenge is we have many countries around the world that need to know the status of their biodiversity. But if you look at where red lists have actually been conducted, it's a lot of the countries are missing that have a particularly high amount of biodiversity. The hatched areas show you areas where a red list might have been conducted, but it's way out of date. The kind of clear areas, there's no red list. And the red areas, there is a red list, but it might just be a red list for a few species. So it doesn't mean that a comprehensive red list has been done for the country. In fact, that's extremely rare. And this was conducted a few years ago, so there might be some changes in that figure. But this is where we want to be. We want to have every country being able to set a baseline. Because if you want to do conservation planning, understanding the status of your species is obviously one of the first critical steps. This is a figure showing you different parts of the world, how many countries there are, and then how many of those countries have national red lists. And then how many of those are up to date. So you see in Africa and Asia and Oceania and so on, there are a massive amount of countries that don't yet have red lists in place. So again, it comes back to the issue of money, and I'd like this to be a discussion later on when we open up to the floor. But we have to start being very creative, and we need to start putting pressure on governments to actually provide the resources so we can collect this baseline information. And so at the end of these talks, I would like us to come back to a few points, and obviously anything anyone else that wants to add would be great. But I'd like us to think about how best do we access funding, how do we build a supportive network, how can we better use the website that we've been developing, how can we create a stronger community so that we can support each other, how can we better develop tools. So I went through a number of tools you could use, but you may have some examples of how you're using it in your country that we haven't even thought of. I've already mentioned the website, but it will be online live this evening. But if you have ideas of ways in which you think a website could be more useful to bring us together and help us develop red lists or even generate revenue, that would be wonderful. So with that, I pass on to Rebecca Miller. Pass on to John Paul Rodriguez, who's going to look at the global to the regional national red lists. John Paul.
There's a pointer in. Okay, thank you very much for being here. This is going to be a very short presentation. We really want to try to open the floor as quickly as possible for you to tell us about your experiences and your expectations. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things before moving on to the discussion. So what we like is to reach a stage where the global red list and the national red list, this is the old version of the website that Jonathan was talking about. The new one, as he said, will be available later today. And what we want them is to be two databases that speak to each other seamlessly. We're hoping that national assessments become a key input of information to the global red list, especially endemic species of countries, because as you know, the listing, the assessment done on endemic species at the national level should be the same as the assessment done globally for those species. So we hope that as the national red list efforts grow, these assessments will find a way to more quickly integrate the information of the national assessment into the global assessment. And that's a hope that we've had for a long time, and I think we're moving in that direction. And also very important for the national red lists is to have the global context of the global status of a species, because in the regional guidelines that Jonathan was mentioning, one of the things that any national assessor has to do is to report the significance of the species in a global context. You know, what proportion of the range is included in that country and so on. So both lists have information that is useful for each other, and they're increasingly more connected, but we're aiming for even more connection in the future. So that's one thing that we would like. Any thoughts? The big challenge is how to make the standards of national red lists be the same as the global ones. So if you have any thoughts about that, that'll be very useful. You already saw this from Jonathan. We're the coverage, the global coverage is quite good at the continental level. You'd say in many parts of the world, it's very, very bad. These little dots you can't really see them, but it's very, very bad in the ocean areas in general. And many of these data, the countries that do have lists are old. And also, another misleading bit is that just by having one taxonomic group covered, you cover the country. That also, so there's a lot of work to do, and we think it's a really fundamental piece of information that needs to be worked on more. Now, in addition to the global assessments, calculations and processes such like as the red list indices, the national red lists give us an opportunity to look at trends in biodiversity more locally. More, as you know, these global assessments have a great value as a evaluation of information, but in many cases, the actual implementation of conservation policies happens at a local level, national level, or even less than national level. So being able to lead these assessments at those scales that are relevant to policy and decision making is really fundamental. And we did this for the animals of Venezuela. In the picture is different when you do these nationally than what is the global picture, and it's important to know these differences when you're thinking about policy. Now, the biggest challenge I think that we have to face is not only that there are very limited funding for these kinds of efforts, but also that we have something which we're calling which I call the paradox of biodiversity, is that species are found in the wrong place, so to speak. Species are in one place and resources are in another. And for example, if you look at birds, just to take any taxonomic group, you see that the tropical areas tend to concentrate the largest numbers of species. But when you look at financial resources like per capita GDP being an indicator of that, you see that they're located in opposite parts of the globe. When you look at the scientific capacity as reflected by a number of authors in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, again, the concentration is in higher latitudes, both north and south. And we look at institutional capacity, in this case, measured as IUCN members, NGOs, and governmental agencies. This is a little bit out of date, but the picture continues to be more or less the same. You get the same picture. So we're looking at having to find a way that we compensate these two things. We have to be very creative in developing the capacity to do these assessments in places where we don't have people, money, or institutions. So the challenge is being in thinking about how to do this in an effective and original way is really fundamental. Now, what kinds of things do we see important for the future? Well, first of all, we have to make sure that large bodies like the CBD and EPBES are fully aware of the importance of assessments carried out at the national level to help push forward creative policies. And that hasn't happened yet. And bodies like GEF, who are the ones that end up financing many of the activities that these large organizations need to understand that a little bit better. So we can do that through our governments, through our organizations, push these agendas in these large organizations so that then those mandates get percolate to the donors. We think it's fundamental to take advantage of existing networks of experts. Lots of people have done red lists in many parts of the world, and many of these people are willing to help others develop those red lists. So finding a way that as IUCN, we can promote these networks of trainers, people that are what Rebecca's doing, focus on developing those skills, so that they are available. We don't have to be dependent on staff or people that we hire for projects to do this training. Maybe we'll have a way to use the knowledge of the network and then invite people to participate in the training and building capacity. We have to think of ways to do this in a way that doesn't require a lot of resources, but is able to mobilize the intellectual capital that is available and exists around the world, and speaking lots of different languages too. We also think that we should start to think of ways to use technology better, and not only to improve access to information and the data that these red lists captures, like Jonathan was showing in the National Red List website, but also to encourage public participation. We want people to be more involved in generating the information and using the information of red lists. And I just wanted to close with an example of a website that we are developing in Venezuela and will be out in a couple of weeks. It's you can find the rough draft, and I want to insist that it's still a work in project, but you can find it at wikieva.org.ve. This is a wiki red list. So what we are doing here is that we are emptying the content of the last edition of the Venezuelan Red List of animals into the wiki, and we're developing pages for each species using that information that exists already in the book, and then we're opening to the public and inviting people to participate. The idea is that over 4 or 5 years, the wiki will be open, and information will be, hopefully, will be pouring in, and people will be contributing data to the wiki. And then at that time, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, we'll close it for a little bit, process the information, generate the updated red list of species, and then open it up again for the next round. So what we're hoping is that being able to use